Hello, everyone, and we are back on Fear Street. And today we have a super special episode for you all. Super special. We have Armand, the director of He Knows You're Alone. And if you follow the podcast at all, if you've listened to our episode on it, Sheree and I were gagging on this movie. So like we are so excited to jump into this and get to know Armand and the process and where it's at today, the process between when it was released and today, and all the things in between. So, Sheree, let's just get down to the questions because we got a lot to get through.
Yes.
Sure.
First off, thank
My
you for
pleasure to
being
be here,
here.
guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. This is one of the best times the internet's ever come through for us because how often do you find your new favorite movie and then you find the filmmaker behind it? Like, what is
Yeah.
that? um, so we start here with everybody so we can get to know you a little bit better. What is your horror origin story? Was there a specific movie or comic or book that like really pulled you in?
Well, you got to understand now, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I was very impressed with films like The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The
Yes.
Thing,
Yes.
and then the Alfred Hitchcock Hour that was on, or the Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And so my background, and it wasn't more in the grotesque area of horror, but more in the suspense, the creepiness, the building of suspense. And I've always admired because you can identify with that. That's something real. Whereas when you watch, heads being chopped off and eyes gouged out, it's all manipulated and it's all fake. So I was always like, I know what scares me. And I think if I can tell stories that scare me, I bet I could scare someone else. So when I was very young, I was in the Boy Scouts and stuff. And they always picked me to tell a story at the campfire at night. And I'd always create this creepy story. And I remember a lot of times where people would be all reluctant to go back to their tents because it was dark and we had flashlights and stuff. Then you'd hear, Mr. So-and-so, please, could you come over here? Because some kid had to pee or something and he was afraid to go outside. But, so I said, gee, this works, and then I've always loved movies. My youngest recollection was going to a theater with my aunt and uncle. They took me, or my mom and dad. I don't even remember who it was, but I do remember the event. And I remember the giant sitting in a room with big curtains, and all of a sudden it gets dark and the curtains open. And you see on the screen, you see these images of people larger than life. And I was like, whoa, this is very cool. And I've always been attracted to that, and always been interested in telling stories, and. So when I was very young, I started making little Super 8 or 8 millimeter films, and they weren't, family. They were the family films too when events would happen. But I would always like call my friends over and say, "Let's do a scene. Let's do this. Let's do that," and I'd create little movies, and I used to make them. So I never went to film school. I never went to any kind of proper film college or university. I was all self-taught. I started making movies, cutting them, and showing them in the garage. We'd hang a sheet from the bed. I'd take one of my mother's bed sheets and hang it in the garage and show my friends the film. And then I started making more and more. And then by the time I was in high school, I made a longer 8 millimeter film, and my friend who was a composer he had like one of those the organ piano kind of things, and he came to the screening and played the music. It was like an old fashioned movie, and that film got a lot of acclaim. People talked about it. And then I went into 16 millimeter. I started a film club in Brooklyn where I was growing up with a friend of mine, John Gray, another director, and we started, making films and showing, working with underprivileged kids and stuff like that, and teaching them, like, hey, do you want to make movies? And they all loved it, so that was a lot of fun. And I was able to work with some of the equipment, and I made some short films in 16 millimeter, which were actually got some acclaim. And then I proceeded into getting more and more advanced and getting into working with 16 millimeter sound. And I made a short film called The Private Worlds of Sophie and Bernie Schwartz, sort of a comedy, but a commentary on a couple, middle-aged couple, who no longer speak to each other. They speak, but they don't really talk to each other. They say, like, she's looking at the newspaper. She's going, oh, look, they're having a shoe sale tonight. Oh, today rather. And he'll go, oh yeah, look, tonight there's this movie, Hangover Square. I got to catch that. So in other words, they're married. They talk, but they don't talk. They don't communicate. But their lives are filled with wild sexual fantasies. Like when they're away from each other, she fantasizes that the grocery boy comes over and seduces her, or the gardener comes in and says he's on his way to work, and at the fruit stand there's this beautiful girl selling fruit, and all of a sudden he's dancing with her like Carmen Miranda, with hair, with all the fruit in her hair, and they're having a love affair, and she's got a rose in her teeth. And anyway, this film got made and got accepted into a festival, a Fordham Film Festival, and the judge was a famous director named Otto Preminger. Have you ever heard of him?
I've heard of the name. I've not seen any of the work though, but yeah.
Well, he made great movies like Exodus, The Cardinal, In Harm's Way, Bunny Lake is Missing, big movies, huge epic films. And he watched he was at the festival. He says, stop. I don't want to see any more films. This is the winner. I want to meet this director. So he did. I met him, and I went up to Columbia Pictures, and I was like, I can't believe it. My mom said, you got a telephone call here from Columbia Pictures, Otto Preminger's office. They want to speak with you. I went, really? Oh my gosh. So I did. I went up there and I met with him, and he just says, your film made me laugh and cry. It's beautiful. How did you make this movie? And he introduced me to everyone in the film business in New York City at the time, Columbia, Paramount, all the people. And not only did he do that, he on a Sunday afternoon hosted a big buffet at his house, showed my film to all of his film friends. And it encouraged me. They all said to me, look, we don't make shorts, we make feature films. Why don't you write a feature script and we'll bring it to us.
Yes.
And so I did. I met with a friend of mine who was a playwright, and we wrote a script, and it got sold right away after, they looked at it, and I got hired by the William Morris Agency.
Yes.
And that led me to He Knows You're Alone, because the individual who was budgeting that film, the potential making of that film, a film was going to be made right away, said, listen, I work with these two producers that want to make a horror film. You want to make a film? I said, of course I do. I'd make any film because I just wanted to learn. And this was going to be my very first movie. I had, I didn't tell them I didn't really have any film education, but I knew how to make films since I had made short films,
Yeah.
But this was going to be a professional thing. However, they came in with another individual who was going to put up half the money. So at that point, we were moving ahead. They said, what's the story? And I started telling them a story that I had told at campfires, and then they were saying, like, this sounds familiar. And then we talked about the idea that it pulls back. I said, oh, and we're in a theater, and they were like, oh, that sounds good, and we started doing that. And I was working helping my dad work in Canal Street in Manhattan. He had a jewelry business, him and his two brothers. And downstairs was another jewelry business, and there was a young guy, Scott Parker, who worked for his dad. And we used to meet for lunch and talk because we were the same age, and we would talk about films and movies. And he was telling me he wrote this movie, Die Laughing, and with Robbie Benson. And I said, hey, do you want to work on a movie with me? And I have these guys that want to make a horror film. And so we talked about doing it, and we sat down and wrote He Knows You're Alone, which was a completely different title at the time. Many titles it went through. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I love that. I love that.
So if you had to pick, I'm not going to make you pick one. If you want to say multiple, you can say multiple, but it's always interesting. What is your favorite scary movie?
Well, I different times I've like I told you, The Thing and Invasion of the Body Snatchers was so creepy. Psycho was a great film. I can't really be specific about one film because they all influence me. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, I'm sure we'll get into that because, we talk about films influencing other directors and other filmmakers. But I can tell you that, I grew up in a time when the graphic violence that we have and the graphic depiction of murder and stuff like that came later, in the 80s and then the 90s, and of course continues. It wasn't. I was never subjected to that. I was more into suspense and making a scary movie, a really scary, edge of your seat film.
So is it fair to say that like suspense thrillers are kind of your favorite subgenre of horror?
Yeah. hmm Yeah, and some science fiction and some, I mean, because I guess we could talk about it because I've been really blessed, I should say, to be able to have made so many different types of films instead of
Yes.
just horror films. I've made everything. I've made westerns, comedies, faith-based movies, science fiction, lots. I mean, once I made He Knows You're Alone, an incredible thing happened. MGM bought the movie, and the minute that happened, they flew us out to Los Angeles, and everybody wanted to meet me because it was a hot thing. It was a hot ticket. Everybody was saying there's this movie at MGM bought He Knows You're Alone, blah blah blah, and MGM immediately offered me a movie. They offered me a movie called A Stranger Is Watching, based on Mary Higgins Clark book,
Oh.
and they wanted me to make it. But I got another call. I got a call from William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist and The French Connection, and said, I got to meet you. I really love your movie. And I went to meet him. He gave me a bear hug, and he says, this movie scared the shit out of me. It was so good. I loved it. He says, here's a script. I want you to make this. I said, you mean you're not going to direct anymore? And he said, oh, no. I'm going to produce films, but I want to make films with guys like you.
Yes.
So I read the script, and of course, it was exactly the movie I had made already. It was another slasher movie in a campus and all that stuff. And I was, but anyway, he had offered to have dinner with me in a night, the next night. And I called and I said, I read the script, and he said, well, what'd you think? And I said, well, it's pretty bad. I figured he was giving me a script to see if I knew what I was reading. And there was this long silence, and he says, that any script can be fixed. And I said, oh, yeah, I guess. You still want to have dinner? I said, absolutely. With you? Of course. And we did. We had dinner, and I started pitching this idea that I had for a movie called The Killing Hour. And he was sitting there, and he was listening, and he was going, okay, let's do that. And he called my agents the next morning and set it up, and I had my second movie. So I had to say no to MGM, but yes to William Friedkin, which I thought was great. And he just passed away recently.
Yeah.
And we've been so good. We're such good friends since then. I mean, he absolutely didn't make the film only because he suffered a major heart attack. And he had his office call me and say, listen, you did this script. It's yours. I want you to try to get it set up because I can't proceed right now. And I went back to the guys who, I made He Knows You're Alone with, and they were like quick to pick it up because they made so much money on that film. They got a huge advance from MGM. So, and that led me to another. I mean, and word got around, and I started working a lot. So, and then I started getting into television and stuff, Tales from the Dark Side, Dark Shadows,
Yes.
Friday the 13th, War of the World. So, but then, I was also able to step out into another genre, and that was the domestic violence thing. Someone had seen, I think they saw Distortions or Cameron's Closet or something, or one of the films I did. Anyway, one of the actresses said, I want this director, and I want him to direct this. And this was for a big movie at CBS, movie of the week it was called My Husband Is Going to Kill Me. And it was based on a true story.
Yes.
Domestic violence, but that wasn't the final title. The final title was, oh God, I can't even think of it now. There's so many titles in my head. It was called When No One Would Listen. Okay, they changed.
Okay, yeah.
And it was Michelle Lee and James Ferrantino. And so I said, hey, I'm going to do stuff with this because CBS was very reluctant to hire me. They said he makes movies. He doesn't know about TV. He doesn't know how to stay on budget and stay on schedule. But I proved them wrong. I did a great job. The movie came out and got tremendous ratings for them. For they said, the movie is very suspenseful. You're like walking on eggshells. You always feel his presence when he's around his wife, and at any moment he could attack or slap her. And she's like, the performance is beautifully crafted, and so it got me a lot of attention then, and I was able to move into different genres. And I started doing a few of those kind of movies, domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
The woman who killed the guy in the courtroom who assaulted her daughter. She had a little kid. I made that film, Mother's Revenge, and lots of them. And then, of course, it escalated into miniseries and 4-hour and 5-hour, expensive movies. And then I did a few features in there too, along with a film called The Celestine Prophecy, which was based on a book. You see it behind me over there. Based on a book that was like internationally known, but it was kind of a new age philosophy and ideology about, spirituality, and we're living in heaven right here on earth. We just don't see it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is awesome. One of the things I love about your journey is you prove you don't have to go to school and go into all this debt to do the thing. I think a lot of people can study film and they can excel at it because you are self-taught and you're able to navigate all these different genres.
And I tell a lot of students when I go speak at colleges and stuff like that, and people come up to me and ask, how do you get started? And I said, look, everybody's journey is different, but I never went to film school. I taught myself. And I said, and I think film school is a good thing. I mean, you'll learn the aesthetics, you'll learn about the technology and you'll learn about film history and stuff like that. But the real way you learn is being on a set and working with actors and seeing the problems that confront you. And how are you going to deal with this? Now, what are you going to do? So I did something from the beginning when I first started making films, because I was allowed to stay on the set of The Godfather by Francis Coppola. I snuck up onto the set of that film in Staten Island when they were shooting the big wedding scenes and all that stuff. And I saw he was in a lot of turmoil because they were having problems with the light and this and that. And he was constantly getting fired. I mean, it was not the first movie for him, and with Paramount. And I said, I got to talk to him. And so I walked up and he goes, yeah, what? I could see he was not. Hey, listen, I just got to ask you a question. I make Super 8 movies and 8mm movies and I want to be a director and I want to learn. I want to watch it. Please, is it possible that I could just stand here and observe? And he went, oh, yeah, sure. No problem. And he literally takes 3 or 4 steps away, and some person puts their hand on my shoulder and says, what are you doing here? And he turns around, it's okay. He's with me. And he went like that. And I sat next to him for 3 days. He got me lunch, everything. And right next to the camera, I was next to him constantly, watching him direct, watching him talk to Marlon Brando. And Marlon Brando was amazing how he would look off when he was thinking, it looked like he was thinking, but he was reading giant cue cards. And that was kind of interesting because he wanted the spontaneity of saying the line. He didn't want to have it memorized. He would go like, so tell me, Michael, well, how's your kid doing? And Michael would talk, and Brando would be staring off at the distance. And right over Michael's shoulder, Al Pacino's shoulder, was a big cue card with the lines. And he goes, oh, it's funny. He reads the funny papers. He would do stuff like that. And I said, geez, that's amazing. Where most actors come prepared, they come. Mm-hmm. So.
Wow.
I love this. Oh my God. I love when people who make amazing films also love films, because you can tell when people are just doing this and you can tell when they have a passion for it, which I think is part of the reason why He Knows You're Alone is such a gem. You can't see it. Yeah, you really can't watch that if you're a horror fan or a fan of film and not be moved by it and not see all the things it's doing ahead of its time. And so yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, it was my very first movie. It was Scott's second movie that he had written. And so we sat down and knocked around ideas. Now, don't forget, we're talking about late 70s. This was 1978, 79 that we actually started working on the film. And we just said, what I said, you know what I want to do? I want to scare people in the most comfortable places. Like I want to create a beautiful town where everything is nice and bright and you can walk down the street and everybody knows everybody. You know, the local ice cream store, you know, the dance studio, you know, the amusement park, you know, the guy who makes the dresses and he's maybe an old friend of the family. You know, it's not like living in a city where there's a lot of strangers. So I wanted it to be in a very light, bright place and then slowly insert the horror and the terror and the fear of being watched and being followed. And of course, she has her own problems. She doesn't know if she wants to get married. She's a skeptic. She's a skeptic. She's saying, like, I don't know, is it cool to get married? You know, and if you notice, there's no family in this movie. Nobody has family. You never see any parents.
Yeah.
But parents become like the dressmaker, the priest, the teacher, who the other one, Joyce is screwing. You know, all the adult figures, and Marvin is this kind of wacky guy that is like her sidekick, not a romantic interest, but he's that. So she can't really talk to him about it. So she asks these questions of people, like, you know, she goes and questions the dressmaker, the priest, and you know, talks to her friends about it because she's not sure what she wants to do. Now, unfortunately, this guy happens to overhear this guy who's been jilted and has gone insane and is now a wedding kill. He wants to kill brides. Happens to just get off the bus and hear kids singing happy Here Comes the Bride or something like that, and decides, this is a good place for me to stay. And he begins to, you know, haunt her. And if you want, in the film, it's in bright places. Like she's walking down the street, she's in an ice cream store, she's at an amusement park, she's in a dress shop. Everything is nice and light. Even in the church is a little dark, but you feel his presence. Now, as she starts to believe, because nobody believes she's seen anything, they doubt her. As she starts to confirm the fact that someone is following her, the film gets progressively darker. And you notice that by the end, she's alone. She's running into tunnels, dark tunnels, where she's, I mean, so it was intentional to take her from this idyllic idyllic place and put her slowly and being trapped. Yes. You know, and that was the idea. And it got darker and darker. And the whole back half of the film is at pretty much at night, you know, where he comes home and finds Nancy's head in the tank, you know. And, I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we took, you know, liberties with, you know, because you'd say like, oh, come on, would that happen? You know, but look, it's first movie, you know, and I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you, you know, when I was making it, I had ideas like, this will probably be my last film. I don't think anybody's going to like this movie, you know. So,
which is wild because it's so good and it's so interesting, and there's so many conversations that are ahead of its time, because in the 1980s we were not talking about, do women not want to get married? It was, you're getting married. And so I love that she has that doubt. I love that she's like, is this the right thing? Is this the right man?
Yeah. I think my favorite scene one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when they're in the ballet class, like afterwards, and it's like her best friends are sitting around and they're literally like talking about like their fears and their like trepidation to get married in the first place. And I'm curious to know, like, what was when the film came out, like what was the audience response? Like, were there any like pearl clutching or like, because you know, it's conversations that we're still having today, right? Especially with like jilted lovers who are now just taking it on themselves to, save the men in the world or whatever. You know,
I'll be honest with you, that I don't think that ever became a conversation with anyone. Because I think people were talking more about the scares and the stuff that were, you know, they talked about the film. Now I'll give you an idea of one thing that I think you have a question for me about, like, what's one thing a lot of people don't know about this film?
Yes.
I'm going to answer that now. And I'll tell you, like, when they premiered the film, MGM had us out there for, publicity and stuff like that. And we went with a couple of the guys from MGM from theater to theater to just see the audience is screaming and everything. And of course, then when I went back to Staten Island, it was playing at 2 theaters in Staten Island. I watched people like, you could smoke at that time in the theater. I watched the guy burn himself with a cigarette. But here's what happened in this one incident in Westwood, California here near Beverly Hills. I was walking back and I went back to get a drink at the a soda or something like that because the theater was packed. People were screaming. And I looked by the door and the door was half open. And who is it that's looking in that door? Richard Pryor.
Are you serious?
I swear to you. And I said, oh my God, it's Richard Pryor. So I went over and he's looking in like this, and I'm going, hey, do you like the movie? He goes, oh man, this fucking movie's great. This fucking movie's unbelievable. I love it. I said, really? Well, thanks. I made it. He goes, you made this film? I said, yeah. He goes, hey, honey. And there's a woman sitting over by the outside of the lobby like this with her hands in her head. He goes, he made a movie. She goes, I want to kill him. So I said, oh my God, that's the greatest compliment I've ever had. Richard Pryor and his girlfriend at the time, Yeah. So it affected people in a way that. Another thing that I'll share with you is that the night that we premiered it in New York City, I watched a run through of the movie. Now, imagine I'd made the movie, I'd watched it, I cut the movie, I spent hours and hours and hours rewatching and rechanging and doing music and all. And so when I'm watching the movie, I'm like this, watching it, and it's like, oh, this movie sucks. I'm going, this movie isn't scary. This movie isn't scary. But that night, when it was packed, when the theater was packed, the fire marshal guys came in and said, some people have to leave because there were people like sitting in the aisles. It was crowded. And I watched the reactions and people watching it for the first time. Now, I'm sure today it's not scary because it's a 1980s movie, a 1979, 1980 movie. But that time when I saw it with the audience they were like jumping out of their seats and they were like,
I think that there is some really good scares in this movie. Even today, like I think, of course you have to watch it knowing that the film was, from 1980. But like, I think of that scene where they're having the affair and he's like leaning out of the window and I'm like, this dude's about to get it, but he doesn't get it. It's just that building of tension that like, modern day filmmakers.
Scott loved that too. He came up with that idea of her leaning out the window, and I said, let's do that and let's have him like right there, his presence. Like, I mean, you know how scary that is to have someone, because he's a real person. He's not like a robot or he's not a monster, And it goes back to what I said earlier about like I identify more with real scary stuff as opposed to like manufactured scary stuff, like the kinds of films that just really take it so far, but they use it for either so you grossed out by it, or it's maybe it is scary to some people. But I've been asked so many times, why aren't you doing a sequel? Why aren't you doing the sequel? And, there was always a thing about the rights. Even New Line Cinema came to me at one point and said,
that would have been amazing.
A sequel to this. I'm going to say this out there. You got to be very careful when you do a sequel. And I'll tell you why. A sequel, most people want to see the movie again, is really what they want to see it, only a little bit different. Now, if you try to say, now I always would say, like, let's do something different. Let's change this topic a little bit. But here's the trick. If you do stuff like that, think of Exorcist 2,
Yes.
Heretic. Terrible.
Yeah,
Think
so
of
bad.
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. People hated it because it wasn't Halloween. It was a completely different film. But when you start seeing Saw 3, Saw 4, Saw 5, this 6, 7, 8, it's the same movie over and over again. It's kids being slashed and killed. And so I was always saying, like, well, what can I do to make a different kind of movie out of this? I mean, not a different kind of movie, but one that, this audience who liked the first one will feel, like I thought like Aliens was a great follow-up.
Oh my God, yes.
Godfather 2 was a great follow-up to, but those are rare because you got to be very careful with the subject matter, and that you don't rehash old topics that people already know. Oh, I know where this is. He's going to be in there, and he's going to be here, and you got to be very careful. So it never materialized. It never came to fruition that we were going to do a sequel, but people still ask about it. Why don't you do a sequel? Or
like, I would love something. I don't know if it needs to be a sequel or like we're in the requel age, which I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast or not, but I love that your movie is referenced in the Scream franchise a couple times because we have the iconic moment in the cinema, which you and Wes talked about, which I love that story, and I hope you share it here. And then you also have, like, in Scream 2022, the character Wes has something very similar to Nancy in the Home happening to him, where you're like, it's coming down, and it doesn't, and it's like, it's coming down, and it so
all right, so Scream 2 was I was flattered. They want to do sure, absolutely. And I have to add one little piece in here. After I made that film, I was walking on 7th Avenue in Manhattan, and I looked over. There was crowded, people walking back and forth. You know how it is. Manhattan is crowded. And I see Martin Scorsese on his knee going like this. He's just kind of like looking. And I looked down and I says, oh my God, that's Martin Scorsese. And he's just doing this. Oh, excuse me, Martin Scorsese? He said, yeah. I said, well, my name is Armand Mastroianni. He goes, oh, he knows you're alone, right? Right? I said, yeah. He says, you had the knife in the seat. I love that. I think that's great. And he goes, cut. I go, what are you doing? He says, I'm making a movie right now. I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't even. And he goes, Bobby De Niro. It was King of Comedy they were shooting.
Oh my God.
He called him over. He has come over here, meet him. And later, Bobby De Niro visited me on the set of The Killing Hour when we were shooting, came down with Joe Pesci. But anyway, I'm flattered by the fact that people, love or take from, because I do it too. I mean, I watch a Hitchcock movie, or I watch The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or The Thing, or something. And I work, that suspense works on me. So maybe I borrow ideas from it. Maybe I don't shoot exactly the same scene. I interpret it in my way. And so, when, I'm not like annoyed that somebody would want to do that. I think it's the greatest kind of flattery.
Yeah. No. I love to see it because, again, in a genre like this, we are all genre nerds. And so we're just like, I know that kill's coming. Like, for instance, Chucky. Don Mancini loves nodding at older films and older cinema. And so it's kind of a built-in game while you're watching Chucky to be like, that's the Psycho moment. Or that's the whatever moment. And so I love when people reference each other in a way that shows that they also are studying the genre and they also have a reference for these same films. And they're leading us towards films that we might have missed because we were born in the 90s. Because again, we spent a lot of our episodes saying we thought we knew people,
which is very interesting that you chose to visit a movie that, is way before you. You know what I mean? Completely different generation. Instead of being, a lot of people today won't watch black and white movies. A lot of the young kids are going to say, like, well, it's in black and white. No way. I don't want to see that. I want to see something in color. And I sometimes when I go and I talk to the film students, I ask them, are you truly film students? Because wait a second, do you know anything about, like, say, neorealism, that whole period in Italian cinema, or the French New Wave, or this or that? I mean, there were some great films made in that period. I mean, even though they may not be films that you would want to make, they're films that at least inform us of a certain style and a certain way of telling a story, a certain way of dealing with characters that might speak to you. And so I encourage them. I said, check out this film, check out that film. There's a great film that I found by accident years ago when I was younger called Night of the Hunter.
I've not seen it yet.
Charles Lawton directed it, the actor. And it's a very strange, creepy movie about this backwoods a preacher who comes out after these two little children, and he's got love, Love, and hate on his knuckles tattooed, and he plays that. It's just creepy. And there's one shot in that movie that I'm never ever going to forget, and it's a shot of the woman. I don't want to. Should I ruin it?
I mean, yeah, it's our fault for not seeing
Okay.
it sooner. Ruin it.
He kills the boy and the girl. He marries and then kills the boy and the girl's mother. And the uncle who goes out fishing every day, goes out in his rowboat, but he drinks a lot. He starts and he takes the body of the mother and he puts it in a car, an old-fashioned car, which is open. And she's sitting at the bottom of the river with her hair flowing like this, with a big slice across her neck. He goes, she looks like she had a second mouth. And it was, oh my God. And when you see it and the music is like playing this weird,
Yeah.
reminded me a little of Carnival of Souls. You remember Carnival of Souls? Did you ever see that?
Yes, I was about to say it sounds a little bit like that. And also just there's so many references just in the parts that you told us. Like the love-hate tattoos get used all the time.
Yeah.
Uh,
But you see, that's why people borrow from great stuff.
yeah.
If something influences you, why not take it and show us your version of it? I'm not. I don't think it's offensive. I mean, I mean, unless you steal something right out, you steal a guy's script and you remake, like.
Right.
Yeah, that's
But
different.
And I think that there's something to be said for like the respect of honoring the movies that came before that are inspiring you. Like I do love that there was conversations happening between Wes and you when he made Scream 2 to be like, I realize this is inspiring me and I want you to know this is inspiring me. That's why I'm putting it in this movie.
Wes, started doing this series called Nightmare Cafe. And he says, I want Armand to be my co-director on it. That's it. 2 directors, me and Armand, we're going to do it. So I was up in Vancouver and he would direct one episode. I would direct one episode because while he was directing, I was prepping. Then while I was shooting, he would prep the next one. So, and we used to go out to dinner a lot. And he said to me one night, he says, I got to be honest with you. He said, I'm very envious of you. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you get to make all different kinds of movies, all different kinds of genres. He said, and I am stuck in one genre and I want to get out. And I made a movie, he said, called Music of the Heart with Meryl Streep, and nobody went to see it. Nobody cared because I didn't slice her head off or anything. He says, and I said, wow, Wes, that's, I mean, you're a very accomplished filmmaker. You're very talented. He said, yeah, I know. I said, well, all right, let's switch. I'll take over your. He was such a great guy. I loved him and I loved Toby Hooper. Toby was another one who was so great. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then he did, he did
Funhouse.
Salem's Lot. I love that Salem's Lot, that miniseries.
My first Stephen King novel, so I could watch Toby Hooper's version on TV.
Talk about being influenced when. There's that scene where in Salem's Lot where the kid is outside the window and he's scratching at the window like that. I said, I got to use that someplace. I got to use that. And I did this vampire episode in Friday the 13th. I did about 8 of 9 of those. And I wanted this guy just to be floating by the window, with this strange face, and just looking like at it. And I had, we had to hoist him up and it was really interesting. And then there was this whole lesbian vampire thing that I put into it because, again, influenced from a movie called The Hunger.
Yes.
You see that one?
Yes, I did.
And Susan Sarandon. And I had this love scene where the husband is compelled to watch. He had to go out and select a woman, a young girl on the street, like a young hooker, but she was really waif-like, very pretty. And he brings her home and he goes, I want you to have sex with my wife. And I'm going to watch. He doesn't tell her, of course, my wife's going to bite your neck. And the music is so beautiful. It's playing. And she's in this kind of like tent, this veiled tent, because he actually has to keep her chained to the floor because he's afraid she'll escape on him. Yeah. And so her hands are free, but she's able to like caress the girl, and the girl is like, wow. It becomes a very erotic scene. Yes. And he's watching, and I said, gee, it's nice that he's the ultimate voyeur, watching from afar, watching his wife seduce this young girl. And
that's fun.
It's a very interesting movie. Like we have to cover it at some point. I've been thinking that for a minute.
Yeah.
He Knows You're Alone is Tom Hanks's first movie. And you were kind enough to share that you were part of the reason Tom Hanks is Tom Hanks today. Could you please tell
Oh,
listeners, because they will never believe me?
Well, it's certainly in the extras on the DVDs and all that stuff. But the story is that really we were doing this budget. It was such a low budget film because the other investor dropped out. So I went to them and said, "Look, let's shoot it on Staten Island where I live. We'll get all our friends to help." And they go, "What are you kidding? We can't make a film like that." I said, "Yeah, we can." And so we made it for like no money, and so we didn't have money for a casting agent or anything like that. So I had to sit in an office with the two producers who sat in the next office. And by the way, they were very accomplished. They had done Godspell and the Magic Show on Broadway,
Yeah.
American Buffalo. So they had connections, and that's what they also had some money. And they had also made a film called Squirm with a friend of mine, Jeff Lieberman. And but I had to interview all these actors, so I was doing them, and then if I found somebody that that I liked, I just have to bring the headshot in, and they'd say, "They hire him," But Tom came during my lunch break, and I was having lunch, and just nobody was there, and he said, "Excuse me, I'm early. Should I wait outside?" I said, "No, come on in, sit down." And we had like a little kitchenette nearby, and I said, and I had my sandwich was a salami and cheese on rye, and it was sitting in the paper there with the pickle and everything, and I had half. I said, "Hey, so you're hungry?" He goes, "Yeah, thanks." And he takes the other half of my sandwich and starts eating it. I was going to go inside and make him something. So I said, "Oh, this guy's good. I like him." And adding, and I never read him. I just talked to him. I loved his personality. He just was great. I said, "We need someone like this in the movie." So I said, "Give me a resume." And I looked at it and it turned it over. It said school, play this school. So I walked into the producer's office and I said, "I like this guy. I want to hire him." And he looked at me. He goes, "Oh, fuck him. He's nobody. You can't hire this guy." He says, I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Because SAG would charge us a fee, $245 to Taft-Hartley him." I said, "Oh my God, but he's worth it. He's got such great charisma and all that stuff." And they didn't want to hear me anymore. Finally, we negotiated a little bit, and he finally said, "Oh, all right, go ahead, go, do it." But he can't play the lead. He can't play Marvin. I said, okay. So we put him in as Elliot. And it was true that he was supposed to die in the movie, but we liked him so much. We said, "Geez, if we ever do a sequel, I want to keep this guy alive."
which is really interesting because you can't tell me there's not some Elliot DNA in the Randy character in Scream. Like there's just.
I mean, it's the kind of typical guy, and of course they all have that speech. And Scott was wonderful for it. It was about why do people like horror movies? Well, we all love to we want to pay to get some kind of feeling. We don't want to go there and just be bored. We want to get either a laugh, we want to cry, we want to get emotional, we want to jump out of our seats. Yes. Why do we ride roller coasters? And there we go. He goes, roller coaster, because you want the dips and the turns. And so, I mean, it's a traditional speech that's been used over and over again in films. But Tom, I must talk about him for a moment. He's the greatest guy. He was so much fun on the set because we kept coming up with new titles for the film. It was going to be Shriek, Scream. It was going to be called The Uninvited. Oh God, there were so many titles. And ultimately we picked Blood Wedding. And nice. We have I'd show you. I have one of the old-fashioned booklets from it that it has the skull with a bridal veil on it, and it's written. I'll show it to you in a second. Blood Wedding, and maybe I could find it. He later on, we spoke after that. He got bosom buddies, and he got a lot of stuff. Yeah. When I ran into him years later, I said, "Tom, Armand." He came over to give me a big hug. He turns around and tells people, "This is the man who started my career." And at the Academy, he had called me on the stage and he says, "I have a SAG card in my wallet because of this guy." And he started me and he always talks about it, and it was truly a very good experience. And he's just the sweetest guy. He's not he didn't, once he became big and famous, and he didn't shun, he says, "Oh, you little guys, I don't need you anymore." It's not that kind of guy. He's genuine.
He's always seemed cool, and so I love that he got his start in your movie, which again is one of my favorite things to happen in the 80s.
And he definitely did that, and he remembers it. So
yeah. Look,
he told people about it.
As he should, because again, I watch a lot of 80s slashers, and this is definitely one of the ones that like immediately grabbed my attention and made me feel like I'm a better. That is so metal.
Nice.
That
was our public our first. That's how MGM got to see it, because we took an ad out in the papers and said Bloodwedding is available for screening, and they called right away and said, bring the film out here.
Yes,
wow.
I would. That should definitely be a print. If you get to like do the special screenings and things, there should be a print, just for like a little bit of history of the movie.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it exists. I mean, I don't even know about prints of He Knows You're Alone. Some of them have faded and stuff like that. I don't know if they ever made a digital. Oh, they had to have made they made a 2K for the Blu-ray.
So yeah, so I would like to see it. So this question's not on our little cheat sheet, but I just have to ask because again, I'm very nosy and I love this movie. Do you have a favorite scene? And it could be because of the way you filmed it, a story behind it, or because of the way it turned out. Do you have a favorite scene in the movie?
Favorite scene in the movie? No, I don't. I think all the scenes are like, you treat them like they should be special. And there are movies I've made that I do have favorite scenes in that I love, that I can, or it's like turning on TV and say there's a movie that you absolutely love, you just can't turn it off. You got to just keep watching. But is there a favorite scene? No. Well, maybe the opening in the theater, because it was
iconic.
Yeah,
it's up there for me. And I love that you mentioned earlier that you purposefully like put horror in spaces that weren't necessarily you're ready for something horror, like it's not the dark alley. And I love that, because as a movie lover, I love going to the theater and seeing a movie. And of course, I have the Scream 2 reference in my brain already. But when I'm sitting there watching that, imagining that Scream 2 is not even a figment of anyone's imagination at this point, that's wild and so captivating. And it's such a safe space that now is being invaded by something that's like horrific. And it's fat. I love it.
Yeah, and again, going back to what scared you. See, I can speak to what affects me and what I feel and what I interpret, and then I'll put that on film. And what scares me is not the actual event of the stabbing or cutting a head off or something, but it's what leads up to it. I find that far more interesting and far more appealing to me to conceive of. How am I going to do this, and how am I going to turn the corner, and is someone waiting there, and isn't someone waiting there? Or what about when we're in the basement and there's a pair of shoes sticking out? Oh my God, is somebody behind that curtain?
That's part of the reason why the original When a Stranger Calls opening is gold, because it's on the phone and we don't know he's calling from inside the house yet, but we know she's being tormented and it's a dark house and she's alone. And you're like, oh no, I'm so worried for her. And so nothing happens to her. The kids do not have a good night. The parents don't have a good night. But safe.
It's so funny because I know the director of that film, and that film played exactly at the same time as He Knows You're Alone. So,
wow!
The one theater was When a Stranger Calls, He Knows You're Alone. And I said, that's one movie, isn't it?
That's wild. I will say that is what, like you're mentioning, of the pacing of the scare. I think that's what sets great slashers apart from okay or bad slashers. Like, you have to get the pacing of the build up to the stabbing, because like you're right, even to me, like the horror isn't the insertion of the knife into the body, it's everything leading up to that.
Play before the orgasm. I mean, come on.
Yes. Exactly what it is. Thank you so much. I've been trying to describe pacing as sex for years on this podcast, and I'm happy somebody else gets it.
It's a visceral. It's an experience. Yes.
Yeah.
It is. And long can you sustain it? How long can you drag it out and still keep it interesting? I mean, you drag it out to make people bored, that they don't want to watch it anymore.
How long can you edge?
I learned a lot of that from. I think I learned a lot of that from Hitchcock.
I was about to say. There's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of Hitchcockian DNA in He Knows You're Alone. In the pacing and in the suspense.
Scene too.
There you go.
Payoff, but there isn't. But Hitchcock would do that. I mean, he would drag out a scene to make you so uncomfortable, to make you go, oh God, don't do that. Go out of there. Or like, in Psycho, when she goes into the house, you go, oh my God, the mother's in the house. Don't go there. But when she turns her around, I mean, it's just, oh, okay, we all scream, but that's the payoff. It's like, even the shower scene, like, you're with this. Why are we watching her take a shower? But then you see in the background behind the curtain, you see a figure. The door opens and there's a figure standing there. And the figure starts to move closer and closer and closer. And there was some great stuff on the Alfred Hitchcock Hour that I took. I remember the one called An Open Window. An unlocked window. Oh my God, that was so scary. It was so scary because it was about these nurses in a mansion where a guy's in an oxygen tent, the patient, and they're taking care of him around the clock. And there's a strangler loose who's murdering nurses. And that's how it opens. You hear this nurse leaving at night, and the leaves are blowing, and she's walking to her car, and you hear, and she's looking around. Who's there? What a pretty neck you have. And it's like, what a pretty
neck.
Ma'am.
No, ma'am. I'm out. Well, I'm out.
This impressed me. I watched that. I said, oh my God, this is so great. And then, of course, there's a gigantic twist in it. And I love that episode. I reference it a lot. I tell people to watch it if they can, because it's an unlocked window on Alfred Hitchcock. It's scary.
And I think people don't realize that the scariest thing, most times, I would say 95% of the time, the scariest thing is other people. Like, real people are terrifying.
That's why I like to deal with real people. That's why we kill the guy at the end. He's shot. He could die. He's not Michael Myers that he's going to come back. He's not Jason. He's a real threat. But that evil and that threat moves into someone else. Yes. You see what I'm saying? Phil, what are you doing here? Phil's gone crazy. Maybe we know, but
he's gonna do
it.
History has shown.
I used to be really scared when I was young and hear that there's a maniac loose or an insane person loose, and we got to just be careful. Or do you ever hear of the Son of Sam in New York City?
Yes.
Okay.
God, yes.
When they showed on the cover of the newspaper, there was a sketch of it looked like an alien. Really, it didn't look like a human being, but I said, oh my God, there's somebody out there killing people at night, killing them in their cars, killing them and that scared us. That was scary because it was a real thing. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't an alien from outer space. It was a crazy person. And that's what scares me. And that's why I make movies that's,
Yeah. No, it's another reason why He Knows You're Alone hits so hard. It's because these are just random men. These are random men people thought they were going to marry and were good men. And now they're murdering people.
Right.
You
How
kill
well do
one.
you know your partner? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
and like I said, it's such a conversation that we're still having today, and probably even more so. I feel like with online personas and online situations happening and message forums and all that kind of stuff. You're seeing like the incel group happening. Like this killer seems very much like early incels. Like it's kind of timeless how shitty men are.
How often do you hear he was a really cool neighbor? He was a very nice boy. He was very quiet to himself.
All the time. Yeah. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, until they started smelling stuff that they were saying, and he said, "Oh, that's meat went bad and stuff like that." Well, yeah. But think about there's a show coming on Netflix very soon called Monsters.
Yes.
It's about the Menendez brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just think about that. I mean, just think about these two boys. No matter what the backstory is, and I'm not apologizing for anything, but I'm just saying that, maybe they were abused and stuff. They should have left. They should have gotten the hell out of there instead of lived there wanting to take all this money that they wanted from their dad and all. But the fact that they loaded shotguns and went in and shot their mother and their father, and the mother was still alive. They went back outside, reloaded, and went back and finished her off. You got to be a little demented. You got to be. I mean, there's got to be something wrong with you to really execute somebody like that.
Which again is why it's always scarier when it's a real person, because whether or not we get a version of why they did it and why people think they did it, we'll never really know. Because again, they've done something so beyond the beyonds and unhinged that like they could be lying to us if they did tell us why they did it. And so you never know.
Think of Norman Bates in Psycho. He was a real person. You could shoot him, he'd die. But he lived in another world. He was in another. He believed his mother was the other side of his personality, and the mother couldn't stand anything that was out of place or anything that dealt with that didn't conform to her norms. So she had to slash out and kill him, and
And again, you see a lot of that DNA in He Knows You're Alone, and these girls who are not really conforming to society, wanting them to be, okay, you're getting married, you're happy, you're great, because you've got, the one having an affair, you've got the one that's supposed to get married, but she's having cold feet, and just being forced to conform or die. And that's horrific to a lot of people.
I think that's a conversation that you could have about it, but it was never part of the, structuring of the film. We never thought about that. I mean, that became a subtext actually, that, that you appreciated that. I'll give you another example. There's a scene in the film where she runs into where Marvin works. He works at the morgue, of course. And she says, Marvin, Marvin, Marvin. And he's following me. He's chasing me. He goes, come on, Amy. No, he's not. He's not. And he hears something. He goes, oh, shit. Call the police. Call the police. And he picks up a stick, like a piece of wood. And he goes out looking for him. Meanwhile, she goes around the back of the desk, which I told her, go around the back of the desk and call the police. Unbeknownst to her, there's a gigantic window. And it's all dark. It's night. You could see right outside, but you don't see anything. It's so dark. When she turns her back to the audience, and she goes and puts her back to that window. I didn't plan this. Yeah. The audience freaked out. I remember people screaming, "Get away from the window! Get away from the window!" in the theater. Yeah. Like, oh shit, that's great. I didn't plan that. You see, so you have a lot of surprises that happen too when you're making a movie.
And it all worked out because again, this is one of my favorite things I've seen from the 80s, because I've been watching slasher specifically for about 2.5 years now. And I was like, we're gonna have fun, Trent. We're gonna do some stuff like, the standard April Fool's Day, Black birthday, the usual suspects. But also what's this movie?
Wait, Trent, I remember I listened to the podcast you guys did, which I love. And you asked me, it's like, gee, why does she wear the same wedding dress? How about the fact that it was so low budget, we couldn't afford another one? The fact that she never wore it.
That's fair.
She never married Phil. So marries Marvin and she wears it.
Which, I mean, she probably shouldn't have married Phil in the first place, because he was, if I remember, he was not a nice person.
She dodged a bullet. Yeah. I mean, sort of, because he still came back for her.
Well, he was intentionally made to be that way. He was meant to be like, you know where that marriage was going to go in a couple of years. Yeah. Hey, give me a beer.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
I love that there's an answer for that.
Thank you. Thank you for answering my question.
Well, I remember that. That stood with me, and I said, "Well, I gotta have some fun with him about that." It was a low budget film. What do you want? 2 dresses? But that had to be made for her. Really, it did.
Oh wow, that's okay.
It had to be fitted onto her, and obviously the guy didn't make it, but we had it done, and it cost quite a bit, I think.
It was a gorgeous dress. I got why she chose it.
It was amazing, and I hope she kept it.
It's not like I wore it once or twice.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
No, I hope she kept the dress. Like wherever she's at, I hope she has in her closet. It's just like I died in that.
But, you know, I got to tell you something. I said this earlier about feeling blessed that I was able to do so many different kinds of movie in my career, and still I'm working on films. I'm developing stuff, and it's so nice when you love something so much that you can enjoy it. You know, like I always thought about like, God, imagine being one of those people that have a 9 to 5 job that has to go in and punch the clock and look at the clock. When is my coffee break? Oh God, lunch hour's coming up. Oh, great. Oh, it's almost 5 o'clock. Oh, time to leave. I would go out of my mind. I could never live like that. I mean, I could never be that person. Every time I make a movie, it's a new adventure. It's a new journey for me. I go into a whole new mindset. I create a whole new thing, you know, and I live with that and I go through it. And, you know,
Yeah.
like even doing films I didn't like, you know, I did them because I always believed this was going to be my last movie. But, you know, like I did, you know, I did a Western, Gunfighter's Pledge. Then I did a big thing called Invasion it was like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a science fi thing, you know, and I loved it. I loved doing that, even though sometimes, you know, the conditions were impossible to shoot. We were shooting in Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, I did a movie called Pandemic about a virus that breaks out and starts killing people, and this is way before COVID.
That's too real.
Yeah, Faye Dunaway, everybody was, and we were shooting at LAX, and we had a big plane on the tarmac, and the people coming out in hazmat suits and everything. It was 110, 115 degrees. People were sweating, and we had to keep shooting. You know, it's unpleasant making it, but when you watch the film at the end, and interestingly enough, Pandemic was a big hit when COVID hit. They started rerunning it on Amazon. It was, you know, Eric Roberts, what's her name? Faye Dunaway, Vincent Spahn, big cast in it. And it was all about a virus that gets loose and starts spreading and becoming, and people are wearing masks. I said, this looks terrible. Who's going to wear a mask like that? And sure enough, we were doing it years later, a couple years later.
You gave us a blueprint. So thank you for that.
You saved lives.
Every one of these movies has stories that you know, take me back. And, you know, doing Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows was another one that, you know, I got called by Dan Curtis and said, I want you to come out and start directing this. And then he ended up making me the producer of the show because he didn't want me to leave. So, and that was another kind of very erotic vampire thing that I did.
Yes.
Made the front page of a newspaper. Yeah. Because it just said, he bites her on the neck. I said, oh, wow, I want to make this very sexy.
Yeah.
So I said, what if she's wearing something very low cut, you know, and and she's like in this state where he's calling her. He's out in the garden at night, and she's walking through the leaves, and she's looking for him, and then she sees this figure standing in the distance, and she's almost naked because she's wearing this like flimsy thing, and she goes up to him, and she like opens up his shirt. She starts rubbing her fingers on his chest. None of this was in the script. And when I was shooting it, it was taking a lot to shoot. And they were saying, why are you taking so long to shoot? He bites her on the neck. And then I made it more erotic where her breasts were heaving and she turns her back to him and she pulls his head down to her, like, do me, you know?
Cinema.
And then as her breasts started heaving faster, the camera, I had it tilt down and then 2 droplets of blood go down between her breasts, like an orgasm of blood. It was like, it worked really well.
Yeah.
One of the things I've not liked about recent things is that we don't let vampires be sexy anymore. And I'm just like, that was the whole purpose of vampirism. Like,
the whole idea is that, well, if you watch Interview with the Vampire, the new ones, they made it very
I'm on season 2 right now. I just started it.
Yeah,
I love it.
I would do it that way too. Yeah.
No, I'm so happy they've been renewed because I would have cried. I've been there since day one. I think it's everything I've ever wanted from the original movie because I watched the original movie as a child and I was a little film snob, I guess. I was not impressed. I went to sleep. So I was very happy the show took some different routes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes when you sleep, you dream and you dream some good scenes.
There you
I
go.
get
That's
ideas
true.
when I'm dreaming. Sometimes I say, oh, I had this dream last night. That was so interesting. I'm going to put it into the film.
I love that.
Love it. Love it.
So we would like to ask you, because we know that a lot of our listeners are also discovering this movie late and they probably don't understand how many things they've seen in your resume. So if you could pick one horror movie and one non-horror movie for people who are new to your filmography, what would they be?
Oh, gosh.
To start, because they're going to do all of it, obviously. But like, to start.
I don't know. I mean, I see. It depends on what their tastes are. I mean, like I did the Killing Hour after He Knows Alone, the Killing Hour, then the Supernaturals, the Distortions. Then I did Cameron's Closet, which a lot of people love, and you can't find it anyplace. And then I did Double Revenge, which was a kind of a modern day Western, two guys after each other. I mean, one that I really loved making is something that is totally different genre, is a story called The Ring. Not The Ring,
Yeah.
but it's a 4-hour miniseries about Nazi Germany and about this family that's torn apart. Nastasia Kinski is in it, and Michael York, and it's epic. It's really epic. We shot it in Prague and Vienna, Switzerland, then came to New York in and we recreated the 1940s. And
Yes.
I felt like I was making The Godfather. And it's a big, expensive movie. And it's one of my favorites because it really, people, if you just look it up on IMDb, and not on Amazon or whatever, people write about this film. They say, I've watched this film 5 times, 5 hanky movie, So it's another kind of emotion that I can share with people, and hopefully they got from it what I wanted them to get: the separation of the family, the death of a father and the mother was, I mean, it's a very complicated story, but it's a beautiful movie. That's The Ring.
I'm adding that to my list. Absolutely. That sounds right up my alley.
I don't know if you're going to be able to find it anywhere. I mean, it's just
It's well, IMDb said it's on Amazon to rent or buy. So
it is,
apparently, according to IMDb.
and I didn't want to make it because I just finished another virus movie called Virus, which was based on a Robin Cook book, and it was about the Ebola virus that these people are spreading in the city of Los Angeles. So I made like about 5 or 6 virus movies. I did one called Fatal Error, which was a computer virus that people were getting through the screens that was going into their eyes and stuff. Pandemic, Fatal Error, Virus. Believe me, I've done all these virus pictures. So I did a lot of airplane films where there's a bomb on the plane or there's a terrorist on the plane. I've done Nowhere to Land, Final Approach. Nowhere to Land is a really good one. By the way, a lot of these films are on Tubi, and they're on Amazon, on Prime. So if people want to watch them, they can find them on there.
I'm gonna definitely look for Nowhere to Land because I
It's-
just binge
it's
Hijack.
good.
And I'm in my plane era. So like now it's the perfect time for me to move over to that. Like
Yeah. And the other one is called Final Approach. No, Final Approach. Yeah, Final Approach with Dean Cain. That's a 4-hour. And Anthony Michael Hall.
I love Anthony Michael Hall.
Yeah, well, he's great in it. He plays this really psychotic guy, and he's so good.
He does that really
Leah
well.
Thompson, and there's a lot of people. Ernie Hudson.
Ernie Hudson.
Yeah,
You've worked with so many amazing
I work
people.
with Ernie a lot. I like, usually when I work with an actor, that I like to bring them back a few times.
Love that.
We love to see that.
Sean Patrick Flannery. I used him in Citizen Jane, and then he did something else. And then I did a show with him up in Vancouver where he was in the one with Anthony Michael Hall, Dead Zone.
Dead Zone, yes. That version of the Dead Zone was my first version, and then I read the book, and I just got around to watching the movie, which I did not know was directed by David Cronenberg.
Yeah.
I watched it this year, and so like all 3 versions hold up. It's one of the few times where because Stephen King's hard to adapt. and so sometimes people struggle a little bit, but we still love it because like it's the story and it's of the era. But it's one of the few times where like the Cronenberg, the series, and the book, I would definitely say they're all worth the time. Yeah.
Well, I also Universal had approached me right at the time after this. I was going to direct a movie called Psycho 2.
Yeah.
And I was prepping, and I actually brought down my cameraman and everything because the director, unfortunately, who was on the show to begin with, they asked me, would I come in to replace, because he was unavailable for, I forgot what happened. And then suddenly, the last minute, became available again. And
Rude.
since they had contractual obligations, and they had with me there, so we all got paid. But he loved the cameraman that I brought down, and that was the cameraman from Friday the 13th series up in Vancouver, up in Toronto.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he kept him. He says, "This is a great guy," and so he shot Psycho 2.
I love. It's funny because Psycho 2 is our next movie, so it's
Yeah.
gonna hit their feet Monday.
Yeah.
Well,
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
it's pretty good. Olivia
We
Hussey's
both
in
really
it.
liked it.
I worked
Yeah.
with her on Distortions, and yeah.
No, like
Yeah.
it's definitely one of the sequels that makes me like sequels because again, it's diminishing returns a lot of the time, but I feel like it's a very nice continuation of that character.
Yeah.
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 It's my favorite sequel of all of them, which I know that there's 2 other ones out there. I actually watched all 4 of them finally. And it's my favorite sequel of the 4.
Yeah, but again, I think with sometimes when they start overdoing sequels and sequels and sequels, they get a little bit thin. I think Halloween has gotten a little thin right now.
Very thin. And I loved Michael
Friday
Myers.
the 13th, the Jason thing. What are we going to do with him? We put him in space. We put him here. We put him
We
there.
put him in hell. Like
Yeah.
when Jason went to hell, I was like, end it, pull the plug. Like
That's the problem with sequels. You got to be careful. You want to appease the audience that likes that genre so much that they want to see more of it, and you got to be careful that it doesn't become redundant. So, and then if you step out too far, you make something like Exorcist 2, 3, or 2, and Halloween 3. So.
Yes. And we unfortunately live in a time where people are plotting trilogies instead of plotting the first movie, and you don't know if you need more to your story until you finish the first story. So it keeps backfiring.
Well, I had that experience with they called me to do a movie called First Daughter, okay, which was shot in Australia and all that. It was about the kidnapping of the president's daughter, and it turned out to be such a huge success. It was the highest rated movie on television at that time. I even have a poster here saying that. And they said, we got to do a sequel. So they did First Target, where the president becomes the object of the. And that was big. And then we did First Shot, which is when the president actually gets attempted assassination. So we did 3, and that worked. That was a big trilogy for them.
I love that. But like, also you finish the first movie and then finish the second movie, because like we have people who are going in and being like, I have a whole trilogy, let's film the whole trilogy. And then
we
like
had no idea. That was good because you didn't plan, leave open ends, and stuff like that.
No, because like what happens if the first movie is unfinished, or people see the first movie and like, I don't need to see more, and then you're just out there and you've done all this stuff and you've had all these resources and these actors have to promote things that are not doing the best. So it's very awkward. But we have definitely taken a lot of your time this evening, so we're gonna.
Had a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on Fear Street. We loved your movie. We can't wait to watch more.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, this has been incredible. It's all the stories. I've loved all the history and the behind the scenes and all the other stories that we've got told. So I truly, truly appreciate you being on the show.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
And I love talking movies, so anytime.
We'll take you up on that because
when we go back to hit some of those other the original The Thing or the original Invasion of the Body Snatch, because we've done the 80s one, right?
But the original is also really good. Same with The Thing. Those are 2 movies. Well, those are 2 titles.
50s, aren't they? The 50s.
Yeah, the originals are in the 50s. And then like the sequels are 70s, 80s, much like The Fly, because like we know Cronenberg's The Fly, but like it's not the original. Like
the original is terrible.
It really is. It's of all the movies we're talking about, it's the one I don't want to revisit, that original. The other 2 are amazing. Invasion of Body Snatchers, it still holds up, like any version so far.
What was so creepy about that? I mean, when they said there's something on the table downstairs in the basement, and it looks like a person, and I'm going, oh shit! You go in and you see this thing laying there, and he says, "Who does that look like?" The guy says, I don't know, it's not formed. He says, but it does look like you. It's just so
That's creepy. Yeah.
Right?
very creepy movies.
But we will definitely have to have you on to cover one of those movies for sure. But yes, but we've taken up enough of your time. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone for watching / listening, however you're partaking in this.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yes, thank you for your movie, because again,
Yes.
I feel like a better aspiring horror historian for seeing it. It's gotten me very excited, because I'm just like, I've seen a lot of stuff. I'm like, but I've not seen this, and I have to see it again. Yeah.
Yes. Again, as always, everyone, make sure that you stay fierce out there.
Bye.
Bye-bye.